The year is 1996. A 6-year-old beauty queen is found murdered in her own basement. The nation mourns. The media feasts. But behind the weeping father's eyes, something ancient stirs. Something rehearsed. Something protected. You've been lied to. Not once. Not twice. But for 28 years, a narrative has been masterfully sculpted, sealed in concrete, and sold to a sleeping public. Tonight, we smash that concrete. And what's buried beneath isn't just about JonBenét Ramsey. It's about control, obedience, and the grotesque theater of innocence. JonBenét Ramsey didn't just lose a daughter. He lost a piece of a much larger game, one that started decades before Boulder, Colorado, ever made headlines. To understand what happened on December 26, 1996, you have to stop thinking like a civilian and start thinking like the architects who shaped narratives for generations. JonBenét's death was not merely a tragedy. It was a ritual meticulously orchestrated, timed, and symbolically framed. Why the pineapple? Why the ransom note written on their own notepad, 95% longer than most ransom notes ever recorded? Why the staggering resemblance of the note to lines from Hollywood films and military manuals? Because someone wanted this to be read, not just by the police, but by us. This was theater, not chaos. And the father, John Ramsey, was no mere actor caught in grief. Before the cameras rolled, before the corpse cooled, John Ramsey had already called his pilot to ready the family's private jet. Who flees when their daughter is just murdered? Who cleans their house before a crime scene is processed? Who lets their attorney speak to police before they do? Unless you're not just a grieving father. You're a man holding something darker than guilt, something older than lies, something inherited. You see, John Ramsey wasn't just a businessman. He was deeply embedded in the defense tech industry, access to classified networks, government contracts, and, most damning of all, he was positioned at the very edge of America's shadow operations. This isn't tabloid paranoia. This is the sound of the veil tearing. If you're still watching, you felt it. That ripple in the silence. The lie that no longer fits. And we've only just begun. The perfect light doesn't hide in the shadows. It hides in plain sight. John Ramsey wasn't just an executive. He was a systems man. President of Access Graphics, a billion-dollar subsidiary of Lockheed Martin, one of the largest defense contractors on Earth. Wrap your head around that. Lockheed Martin, the titan behind stealth aircraft, global surveillance systems, and covert military tech, had its hands in this man's pockets, and perhaps deeper into his home. Why does this matter? Because when you serve the gods of war, you learn two things: deception and survival, and every tragedy is a chance to hide the truth in public view. This wasn't just a father in mourning. This was a man trained in layers of narrative misdirection and systems engineering. And when things go wrong in those circles, they don't call the police, they activate protocol. Let's talk about the ransom note again. It asked for $118,000, the exact bonus John received that year. Think about that. Out of all the arbitrary figures, the kidnapper picks the number burned into John's pay stub. Coincidence? Or a message? Because in intelligence circles, numbers talk. Codes are currency. And this one screams, "We know who you are." The note references victory, SPTC, a phrase no one has ever decoded. But deep within military acronyms and Black Project terminology, SPTC has eerie echoes. Specialized Biological Tactical Command, Satanic Brotherhood Training Circle, even Saved by the Cross, a cryptic evangelical nod. What's the truth? You're not meant to know. That's the point. This was an amateur job. It was designed to look like one. The broken window, the one that investigators thought the intruder entered through, was already broken before the murder. A known entry point, never repaired. Why? Because the stage was set, long before JonBenét's final breath. This case was never about catching a killer. It was about protecting the structure. The same structure that decides which wars to wage, which narratives to sell, and which families are untouchable. John's connections go far deeper than polite society allows. Defense, intelligence, strategic technology. He didn't just work in the system. He was part of the machine that feeds it. And when a man like that is exposed to risk, the cover-up writes itself. Ask yourself, how does a murder this magnitude in a wealthy neighborhood, with a house full of evidence, go unsolved for nearly 3 decades? Because the truth isn't buried under bad police work. It's buried under power. Let me ask you something dangerous. What if JonBenét's murder wasn't a mistake? What if it wasn't a kidnapping gone wrong or a sick intruder? What if it was a message? Because in elite systems, military, financial, occult, public sacrifice is not madness. It's ritual. It's structure. It's communication. And when they speak, they don't use words. They use events. Let's break the spell. JonBenét Ramsey was 6 years old. A child groomed into pageantry, dolled up like a porcelain queen, lipstick, curls, sequins. Sold to the American psyche as the perfect symbol of innocence. But pageantry is not what it seems. In certain circles, it's initiation, an old-world grooming system repackaged for suburban America. Look at the photographs. Really look. Do they speak of childhood? Or do they whisper control? Of commodification? There are patterns. Always patterns. JonBenét's birthday? August 6th. Same day the first atomic bomb dropped on Hiroshima. Her father's company? Locked into defense infrastructure and next-gen surveillance contracts. Her death? December 26th, the day after the Saturnalia festival ends, a time historically associated with reversal rituals, secret rites, and symbolic offerings. Coincidence? The system counts on you believing that. But behind closed doors, within temples of polished suits and sanitized press conferences, there's a darker understanding. That death, when timed, staged, and framed properly, becomes a key, a signal, a blood-stamped communique sent through the architecture of power. And John, he knew the language. He was calm when he found her. Too calm. He carried her body like a man completing a task. Not collapsing. Not panicked. Not wailing. Observers noted it. Investigators whispered it. The tape shows it. That wasn't grief. That was execution of protocol. And remember this. When the case broke, it didn't just spotlight the Ramsey family. It absorbed the entire nation. Christmas was canceled in America. Every channel, every headline, every home, every conversation, all hijacked by one image. A dead girl in a tiara. That's power. That's control. That's psychological warfare. You think this was about justice? This was about domination. Recalibrating the mind of a nation. Teaching obedience through trauma. Broadcasting a myth so deep, it rewired public memory. And the father? He just kept blinking, nodding, and playing his part. If the elite used blood to signal allegiance, what did John offer? And what did he gain in return? Let's talk about silence. The kind of silence that doesn't come from fear, but from loyalty. Because when you look at the Ramsey case, what you don't see is as damning as what you do. No one in the elite media asked the right questions. No pressure from Washington. No subpoenas into Lockheed contracts. No digging into John Ramsey's digital footprint, financial trail, or former intelligence ties. Nothing. Why? Because certain men are protected. Not because they're innocent, but because they're useful. The game is older than you know. In ancient empires, the elites sacrificed their own bloodlines to maintain power. The logic was simple. To rule the world, you must first prove that the throne matters more than the air. Power is thicker than blood. That's the covenant. And it still breathes beneath the surface of modern power structures. JonBenét wasn't the first. She won't be the last. What if I told you her death was a trigger? Not for justice, but for obfuscation. A pivot point. A memory anchor. Think. What happened after 1996? Global surveillance expanded. Military budgets surged. Private defense companies like Lockheed, John's World, exploded in influence. The culture became addicted to child beauty pageants, reality television, and curated trauma. And quietly, the machinery of control buried its roots deeper into the soul of the West, all seated in the image of a dead girl. It wasn't just a crime. It was a spell. And John, he didn't just survive the storm. He prospered, rebranded, reinvented. A few years later, he was running for public office in Michigan. Let that sink in. After being at the center of one of the most bizarre unsolved murders in American history, he tried to step into the halls of legislation. What kind of man does that? A guilty man? No, a useful man. A chosen man. This is the part no one wants to say out loud. John Ramsey may not have killed his daughter, but he knew what had to happen, and he allowed it. That's why the investigation was sterilized. Why no one ever pressed too hard. Why the Boulder police fumbled every major lead like rookies on a script. Because they weren't investigating a murder. They were containing a breach. And you? You were never meant to ask these questions. Every great lie demands a symbol. For the Ramsey case, that symbol was JonBenét herself. Angelic, frozen in time, made to represent innocence violated. But in truth, she was a vessel, a delivery system. The tragedy was real, but the story crafted around it, that was weaponized. Let me show you how myths are built. Step 1, create trauma. Step 2, deliver contradiction. Step 3, repeat confusion until the public submits. This is psychological warfare on a domestic level. You see, the JonBenét case wasn't just a murder. It was the perfect confusion event. Two opposing narratives were released simultaneously. Either the parents did it, or an outside intruder did, but both were fed just enough evidence to stay alive. Neither fully provable. Both emotionally charged. It fractured the public mind. You weren't supposed to solve this. You were supposed to obsess, to argue, to question yourself, to watch, rewatch, speculate, and ultimately surrender. This isn't sloppy investigation. This is programming. The ransom note itself? 3 pages of linguistic chaos. Military language. Movie references. Odd capitalization. It was a mind virus. A decoy. A distraction designed to keep your eyes off the ritual and on the red herring. Who writes a 3-page ransom note in a stranger's home? On their notepad? With their pen? After supposedly kidnapping their child? No one. Unless it's not a note. It's a script, written to be found, to serve as an anchor point in the ritual structure. But here's what cuts deepest. The camera never lies. And yet, when you watch John Ramsey walk through interviews, press conferences, police statements, he knows. He's not confused. He's not broken. He's performing. Eyes too dry. Voice too level. Body too clean. And then there's Patsy, hysterical in public, robotic in private. A former pageant queen herself. Groomed, trained, controlled. She once called JonBenét my little living doll. Not daughter. Doll. Tell me, is that the language of love or possession? You must understand. In these upper circles, children aren't raised. They're shaped, and sometimes offered. This is why the case won't die. Not because justice is coming, but because the spell must remain unbroken. And now you're seeing it. Let it settle. Let it sink. And if you're ready to go deeper, then type this phrase in the comments. Twice. The veil has cracked. This isn't entertainment. This is initiation. There's something ancient beneath the surface of this case. Older than Boulder, older than America. It's not just about a child or a crime. It's about a ritual system that survived every empire because it knows one truth. Control begins in the mind, but it's sealed in blood. Let's revisit the body. JonBenét was found in the basement, bound, gagged, a garrote around her neck. Blunt force trauma to the skull. But the real shock? The positioning, the staging, the precision. Her body was laid out deliberately, arms raised over her head, wrists tied, mouth taped shut, a blanket placed over her torso, a white nightgown laid nearby, a flashlight wiped clean of prints. That's not rage. That's not panic. That's a ritual kill. The head wound matches no object in the house, except one, the blunt end of a heavy-duty flashlight, identical to the one police found placed neatly on the counter, wiped of DNA. And the garrote, handmade from materials inside the house, crafted with technical skill, military-level knot work, but no fingerprints, no fibers, no signs of struggle. Think about that. If this was an outside intruder, they moved through a house full of carpet, possessions, electronics, and people without leaving a trace. If it was someone inside the house, they executed a multi-phase murder, staged the scene, wrote a bizarre manifesto, and still walked away untouched. Impossible? Unless it was meant to be that way. Because this wasn't about getting away with it. It was about sending a message. JonBenét's body was discovered by her father, not law enforcement. The basement had already been searched. But when John entered alone, he suddenly found her, picked her up, contaminated the crime scene, and carried her upstairs. You think that was grief? No, that was repositioning. That was ritual completion. He had to touch her. He had to carry her. It's part of the rite. Just like in ancient sacrificial ceremonies, the offering must be presented by the patriarch, carried to the altar, eyes forward, no tears. And the altar, in this case, the public. This is why you've been haunted by this story for nearly 3 decades. Because it's not just a case. It's a broadcasted sacrifice. A reminder from the top that they can take the purest thing, desecrate it in silence, and parade it before the world, and no one will stop them. We are not in a courtroom. We are in a temple of power. Power doesn't shout. It whispers. It codes. It marks territory with symbols only the initiated understand. And JonBenét's death was surrounded by symbols so deliberate, so precise, they begged to be deciphered, not by the masses, but by those with eyes to see. Let's break the spell further. The basement, the place of concealment, subconsciousness, death. In ritual symbology, descending into a basement is not random. It's descent into the underworld, the unconscious realm, the place of sacrifice. And what do we find there? A white blanket, a pink nightgown, cord bindings, clean objects placed with eerie reverence. This isn't messy crime. It's stagecraft. Now, let's talk about the pineapple. A bowl of pineapple with milk was found in the kitchen, undisturbed. Yet undigested pineapple was found in JonBenét's stomach. That means she ate it minutes before death. But no fingerprints were on the bowl, except Patsy's and Burke's. Not John's. What does that tell us? That JonBenet was awake, walking, eating, likely coaxed, not snatched. She knew who fed her. She wasn't afraid. She wasn't screaming. She was participating until she wasn't. And then there's the stun gun. 2 perfect marks were found on her neck. A spacing that matches police stun batons, not toys, not improvised weapons. Military grade, purposeful. Not to kill, but to immobilize. Because you don't want your ritual victim to fight. You want her compliant, quiet, present. Still think this was an accident? Still think this was some lost burglar? Let's revisit the note. Again, don't try to grow a brain, John. That line is psychological dominance, not ransom. It's a command, a reminder, an echo of previous conditioning. And that sign-off, victory, SBDC. The phrase has never been decoded publicly, but in occult circles, initials are keys. SBDC has been linked to ritual groups, blood societies, and ancient Saturnian cults. Victory isn't just a word. It's the end of the ceremony, a declaration of fulfillment. This is the part they hide. The murder scene was not just forensic. It was symbolic architecture, because in dark power systems, the environment must mirror the act. Location, language, emotion, ritual, all aligned, all intentional. And John, he walked through that house like a man tracing steps he'd memorized long before that night. JonBenét's death wasn't the beginning of anything. It was a conclusion of something older, something owed. The debt had come due, and the offering was made. There's a reason this story refuses to die. It's not just about the murder. It's about what it unlocked. Once you see the patterns, you can't unsee them. And once your eyes are open, the world is not the same. Ask yourself, how many cases like this have surfaced since? Children, public innocence, mysterious notes, media frenzy, yet no resolution. The JonBenet case was a blueprint, a prototype, a psychological weapon. It taught the elite 2 critical things: that the public can be emotionally hijacked through ritualized grief, that even the most grotesque symbolism, when packaged in enough confusion, will be dismissed as coincidence. But that's the trick, isn't it? Symbolism is their language. It doesn't speak to you. It speaks to them. Let me show you. JonBenét, a French name. It's not common. In fact, it's a hybrid, John, her father, plus Benet after a famous poet. That's not an accident. It's a naming spell. In ritual practices, naming is ownership. It's invocation. You are shaping identity by design. Now look deeper. Her middle name? Patricia, after her mother. Her last name? Ramsey, rooted in Old English. Ram's Island or Wild Garlic Island. In ancient symbology, the ram is a symbol of Ares, Mars, aggression, and sacrifice. JonBenét Patricia Ramsey, the daughter of a warrior, the mirror of the mother, the offering of the father. This is how the system speaks. The autopsy revealed something else. Chronic injuries, older trauma, injuries that didn't come from that night. We're not talking about one tragic act. We're talking about a pattern, a conditioning, the slow degradation of innocence. And that brings us to Burke, her brother, 9 years old, interviewed, protected, shielded. Years later, he would give off a chilling presence, smiling, smirking, avoiding. Some say he was just awkward. Others sense something deeper. There are rumors, dark ones, that Burke was both participant and pawn, that he wasn't just a brother, but a witness, or worse, a test. But whether Burke knew or not, he was shielded by lawyers, by money, by media, because this family wasn't being investigated. They were being handled. What does that tell you? It tells you the Ramseys weren't just civilians caught in tragedy. They were assets in a system far more ancient, far more ruthless than you've ever been allowed to imagine. Let me show you the machinery. This wasn't a case. It was a containment operation. And the first rule of controlling public memory? Control the narrative gatekeepers. And the media. From the moment JonBenét's body was found, the press exploded. Not with questions, but with spectacle. They didn't interrogate. They entertained. They saturated. They hypnotized. And who fed them? The Ramseys' own PR firm. Crisis management experts were hired within days. High-powered attorneys. Media strategists. Ex-FBI negotiators. Not your average grieving family response. Why? Because they weren't preparing for justice. They were preparing for theater. John and Patsy gave interviews on national television before they ever sat down for a police interrogation. The narrative was shaped through cameras, not courtrooms. Every angle curated. Every sentence filtered. Every tear rehearsed. Ask yourself, what kind of power lets you bypass standard police protocol, control your media exposure, and shut down investigators for months? Not innocence. Influence. And what are the investigators themselves? The Boulder Police Department fumbled basic procedures. No warrant for days. No proper interviews. No separation of witnesses. Evidence mishandled. Crime scene contaminated. Rookies? Or controlled. More than one lead investigator resigned or was reassigned. Some tried to push deeper. Those that did were met with roadblocks, legal threats, or career sabotage. Because this case had boundaries, lines no badge was allowed to cross. The FBI was involved. Quietly, but not to solve the crime. To contain it. You see, when something ritualistic happens inside a protected household tied to national defense infrastructure, the response is not judicial. It's strategic. And at the center of it all? John Ramsey, calm, measured, posturing humility but radiating control. When asked what he thought happened, he simply replied, "We're not supposed to know." Not supposed to know. That's the closest he ever came to confession, because that's how the system operates. Not with answers, but with questions that loop forever until the public surrenders. JonBenét's image became a national altar. Her death, a psychological anchor. And the case? A perfect lie, designed not to be solved, but to be remembered. Because remembering the pain is part of the programming. This is the point of no return. Now we cross the line. Everything before this? Surface. Scratches. Echoes. What comes next is where the real current runs. You've heard of MK Ultra. But what you haven't heard is how its aftershocks still pulse through elite families' generational bloodlines, and yes, even tragic household names like the Ramseys. JonBenét's death wasn't isolated. It fits into a continuum, a psychological control system that merges media, trauma, and symbolism into something far more effective than bullets. Compliance. Let's revisit John Ramsey's professional world. Access Graphics, a company embedded in military tech, sold to Lockheed Martin, the same corporation that's been awarded billions in defense and surveillance contracts. But Access Graphics didn't just move products. They moved information. It was the 90s, the dawn of the digital age, a time when the military-industrial complex wasn't just controlling the battlefield, it was constructing reality. John Ramsey stood at the center of this pivot. He didn't need to pull the trigger. He simply needed to be willing. And that's what the system selects for, not killers, but collaborators, men who will protect the ritual, because they've already been initiated into the architecture. Initiation comes in many forms, some through war, others through commerce, and the darkest through loss. So what if JonBenét's death wasn't just covered up to protect John Ramsey? What if it was his initiation fee? These systems operate in silence, but they leave signatures: ritual sacrifice, child pageantry, elite protection, symbolic language, intelligence ties, all converging on a single family, a single house, a single child. This is how MK culture survives, not as a single program, but as a framework, a model for imprinting trauma, rerouting narrative, and commanding belief. And every time a case like this paralyzes a nation, every time the public forgets what they were doing and fixates on one perfect image of innocence lost, the system tightens its grip. It no longer needs to hide. It needs only perform. This is where it gets personal. Because if you've watched this far, something in you is already waking up. Something ancient. Something sovereign. The part of you that remembers. Now, type it again in the comments. The veil has cracked. The veil has cracked. Let the system know you're no longer asleep. Now we confront the unspeakable. You've seen the patterns. You've followed the symbols. But now we ask the question few dare to voice. What if JonBenét's death wasn't just a ritual, but a contract? In high control systems, occultic, military, corporate, death is not chaos. It's currency, something exchanged, traded, leverage, and the darker the offering, the greater the return. Think, after JonBenét's death, John Ramsey's influence didn't shrink. It expanded. His business was sold to Lockheed. His net worth soared. He attempted to run for office, untouched by scandal. He was protected because he'd proven something: loyalty, not to his family, not to truth, but to the architecture. The men behind the curtain don't need saints. They need functionaries. People willing to play their part in the machine without asking questions, without breaking form, without blinking. And make no mistake, John did not blink. But why a child? Because in esoteric systems, the younger the offering, the purer the energy. You don't have to believe it. They do. And that belief, backed by centuries of ritual law, creates a terrifying psychological truth. They feed on purity, not in some cartoonish vampire sense, but through transference, power absorbed through trauma, public emotion harvested through shock, control cemented through shared grief. It's a ritual that doesn't just happen in secret. It requires your attention, your sorrow, your participation. That's why JonBenét's face became everywhere. Magazine covers, TV screens, books, interviews, documentaries. She was transformed into a global icon of innocence. And innocence is the most potent bait in the game. Every tear you shed, every hour you watched, was part of the ritual. And they counted on it. That's how they write their myths. That's how they seal their spells. Not just through sacrifice, but through the collective witnessing of that sacrifice. It's the same structure used in ancient Rome, in Babylon, in the bloodlines of Europe. Sacrifice, spectacle, silence, and behind it all, a father who never cracked. Because once you're in the system, you either serve it or you disappear beneath it. We are not watching a man mourning. We are watching a man rewarded. Now we stare directly into the machine. You've heard the phrase before, the system protects its own. But you were never told what that actually means. It doesn't mean immunity from crime. It means invisibility within it. You've seen how John Ramsey was shielded. But now ask by whom? Not just the police, not just attorneys, but a latticework of agencies, corporate allies, psychological experts, and media handlers, all synchronizing like gears in a hidden engine. The same engine that runs elections, that funds both sides of a war, that manufactures enemies abroad and distractions at home. This is a system that molds belief, and belief is the battlefield. The Ramsey case was a prototype of a new breed of public ritual, one that doesn't need truth or evidence, just emotion, just perception. They didn't need you to believe John was guilty. They needed you to wonder, because in the fog of that wondering, they inserted control over the justice system, control over media bandwidth, control over trauma, yours. Remember the timeline. JonBenét is murdered. The story goes national. Emotions rise. Suspicion flares. But no indictments. No closure. Just speculation. That's not failure. That's function. The system learned from this. They learn that the public will accept unanswered trauma as long as they're given an emotional roller coaster. Rage, confusion, sympathy, disgust. And over time, numbness. Do you feel it? That strange dullness when you hear her name? That's not just time passing. That's conditioning. This is the deeper purpose of the Ramsey mythos. To teach you to accept the unsolved. To normalize the mysterious. To train your mind that some things are just beyond explanation. But they're not. They are engineered, constructed, designed. JonBenét wasn't just silenced. So were you, through entertainment, through manipulation, through manufactured grief. And now, nearly 3 decades later, the case still haunts, not because of what we know, but because of what we were never allowed to uncover. John Ramsey still walks free, not because he's innocent, but because his purpose was fulfilled. And the rest of us, we were meant to forget, but you didn't, and that's why you're still here. This is where we step beyond the crime, beyond Boulder, beyond the Ramseys, into the deeper architecture. The real question isn't who killed JonBenét. The real question is, why does the world protect those who kill with symbols? To answer that, you must understand this. Power has religion, not in the church pews, not in temples, but behind closed doors, where rituals are older than the Bible, where secrecy is sacred, and where death isn't tragedy, it's tribute. In these circles, sacrifice is not viewed as murder. It's viewed as transaction, a give and take with the unseen, an exchange of something precious, for influence, protection, advancement. The ancients offered lambs and virgins. Today, they offer children dressed in tiaras, staged in televised nightmares, buried beneath PR statements. You think it's paranoia, but look around. Every year, new scandals erupt, connected to the same circles. Elite families, global NGOs, celebrity foundations. Whispers of trafficking, blackmail, secret flights to islands that don't exist on tourist maps. And always no names, no charges, no answers. That's not incompetence. That's ritual preservation. Because every system, government, media, academia, law enforcement, has been compromised. Not fully, not publicly, but just enough. Enough to ensure that any case like JonBenét's will never be solved. Only speculated, endlessly. The ritual isn't just in the act. It's in the unsolvable confusion. Why do you think her case still leads documentaries? Why does her face still haunt true crime forums? Why, after all these years, does no one really know what happened? Because that's the point. To generate trauma. To leave the wound open. To let society bleed out slowly. It's not just about one girl. It's about a formula. Create a symbol. Broadcast the pain. Fog the facts. Feed the beast. And the beast is real. You felt it. That crawling presence behind the headlines. The sense that something far more ancient, far more calculating, is still running the show. And when you finally see it, Not with your eyes, but with your spirit, something shifts. Not fear, but clarity. Because from here on out, you don't just observe. You remember. This is where the transformation begins. If you've come this far, you're not the same man who started this journey. Your illusions have cracked. Your senses sharpened. You no longer see JonBenét as just a victim. You see her as a message, a mirror held up to the very structure of power. And the reflection? It's monstrous. But now we must turn the mirror back on ourselves. Because the most forbidden truth in the Ramsey case isn't just that an elite family may have sacrificed their child. It's that we helped them do it. Not consciously, not willingly, but through silence, through distraction, through participation in the spectacle. Every click, every headline, every whispered theory. We became vessels for the ritual. This is the next evolution control. Ritual by proxy. The people become the priests. The audience becomes the altar. The ritual repeats itself inside us. This is how you enslave a society without chains. You make them feel the crime, but never understand it. You keep them hungry for justice, but never feed them closure. You turn pain into addiction, confusion into worship. And the system? It watches, it learns, it refines. JonBenét was not the beginning. She was a test, a public calibration of mass control. And it worked. After her came more. Missing children, global rings, names whispered, then buried, evidence surfaced, then vanished. Until now, you couldn't connect the dots, because the map wasn't printed. It was encrypted, written in pain, sealed in media, hidden in plain sight. But now, your vision is changing. You see through the headlines. You hear what's not said. You feel the pressure beneath the polished surface of power. You're no longer a spectator. You're a decoder, and that makes you dangerous. Because a man who sees the pattern can break the pattern. You're not here by accident. Something in you is always looking for this moment. The system calls it obsession. We call it awakening. And in section 15, you'll face the final truth. The part that's been waiting for you all along. This is it. The final descent. The last veil. You now know JonBenét Ramsey's death wasn't simply the work of a deranged outsider, a panicked sibling, or a careless parent. That's the camouflage, the distraction, the child's mask placed over something far more ancient and far more deliberate. The truth? JonBenét was not just murdered. She was used as a sacrament, as a symbol, as a signal. In a world ruled by psychological operations, rituals are the ultimate technology because they don't just control people. They control reality. They bend belief, shape memory, and lock entire nations into psychological loops. And John Ramsey? He didn't break, because he didn't need to. The system was never designed to punish men like him. It was designed to test their obedience. And he passed. That's why the police stepped back. Why the media steered the narrative. Why no judge, no jury, no court ever dragged him into truth. Because the machine got what it needed. A public sacrifice, a national trauma, a myth to re-anchor society on the edge of waking up. You may not remember the night JonBenét died, but your nervous system does, because trauma lives in the body, and the architects of the modern world know that better than any neuroscientist. They don't rule through laws. They rule through shock. And the only way out is to reclaim your mind, reclaim your memory, reclaim your sovereignty. So now I ask you, what do you choose to do with this knowledge? Will you bury it? Will you compartmentalize it? Will you numb yourself like millions before you? Or will you remember, not just the girl, but the lesson, the machinery, the spell? You are no longer asleep. You are no longer harmless. You are no longer theirs. Comment again, right now, if you feel in your bones, the veil has cracked. The veil has cracked. You've crossed the threshold. This isn't about JonBenét anymore. This is about you. And the perfect lie will never work again.